Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Fuck Calories. This is a short episode that we're going to call Science Corner. And Dr. Sarah has an excellent article for us to talk about today. Dr. Sarah, tell us what you found.
Hey, awesome. So this is an article. This is actually a review article. So this isn't like one individual RCT, like we sometimes talk about. This is a review article, meaning it's a conglomeration of and like a recap of several past articles. So this came out in 2022 in February, so just barely 2 years ago. And it kind of goes through some of the GLP-1 effect with certain substance abuse. And so the reason why we brought this up is because I think you and I have talked multiple times about like carb addiction and addictive type feelings and how we feel like these meds kind of break those cycles.
Mhm.
And so I kind of wanted to dig into like what actually we know about these type of addictive behaviors and how GLP-1s affect the brain, because everyone just kind of wants to talk about, oh, well, it slows motility and that's all it does. And so you're eating less, but there's really more to it. It has a lot to do with the brain and your brain chemistry, which is really, really important. So we have, so these meds have been out for a long time. Obviously Ozempic, and the Ozempic-like drugs have been more recent and been a more new phenomenon, but GLP-1s have been out for over 20 years, more than 2 decades. They originally started as diabetic medications. And so a lot of the studies we're going to talk about today actually started in some of the older class of drugs or the older types of drugs within the class. And so we'll kind of talk about all of those today. But basically, it started out when we were doing trials and we were treating diabetics with the older GLP-1, Saxenda, et cetera. Patients were noticing and reporting, patients who especially had struggled with alcoholism in the past were noticing, hey, when I'm on this medicine for my diabetes, I am not having the same alcohol cravings that I was or that I used to have.
Mhm.
And a lot of people were didn't want to be too impressed by these meds, and they're like, well, come on, like alcohol is really highly calorically dense. You're not eating as much, of course you are not wanting alcohol as much. And they kind of poo-pooed the effect and kind of attributed it to just the decreased food intake. And I feel like we see this a lot even now, like, people are saying, oh, well, you're just eating less on these meds and it's slowing down motility, so you're not wanting, you're not eating as much food. And you and I have talked about how that is, yes, that's true, but it's not the whole effect. It's definitely not the whole story. So some researchers have been wanting to kind of delve into this and try to parse out, is this just a caloric effect, or is there something there? Is there something that the GLP-1s are affecting the brain chemistry? And so that's exactly what they looked at. They said, okay, so let's take another drug that is not calorically dense and that does have the same dopamine causes the same dopamine seeking behaviors, but is not calorically dense. And let's see if we can reproduce the same effect or see what is there. Are they craving it or are they not craving it? So then you went to cocaine and methamphetamines. There's like two, some of the trials used both because they were kind of got lumped together as like these anti-calorie drugs. Just because when you have cocaine or when you have amphetamines, you tend not to be as hungry. And so they tend to be a little bit calorically negative. And obviously it's a little bit challenging to do cocaine and meth studies in humans. So they were doing these there's some studies in rats, there's some studies in mice. A lot of these are in animal studies. And just kind of as a baseline, we know that cocaine and methamphetamines cause a really high dopamine response. That's the acute high that you get is partially related to dopamine. But then over time, your body says, oh, that's a lot of dopamine. So you end up with a down regulation of your receptors of dopamine over time. So what that means is that you get this really, really intense high when you take the medication and you feel really good. But then long term, your overall good feelings go down. So you actually feel worse at a baseline, and then you need more and more of the drug to feel like normal.
Mhm.
So basically, they took mice and rats, and what they did is they gave them the GLP-1s as with either the cocaine or the meth, depending on which study it was. And they noticed that GLP-1s increased the dopamine receptors in the postsynaptic, which I don't mean to say all that, but if you don't know what postsynaptic is, it doesn't mean anything. But basically, it's just that they were correcting or increasing back that decreased dopamine receptors that we were seeing in this chronic cocaine use.
Mm.
So that was really, really interesting. Obviously, we can't cut up the brains of humans after you give them GLP-1s and cocaine to find out if it's happening in humans, but it does seem to be happening in both rats and mice. And so that's really interesting. And then they also found out that, like, if you uh, have a so if you have two groups of animals and they have never yet been exposed to cocaine, you pre-treat one of them with exenatide, which is an older class of GLP-1 that we don't use that much anymore. But like I said, a lot of these studies were 10, 15 years ago. If you pre-treat the mice with this GLP-1 and then you provide them with cocaine, they don't have as much of a high and they don't repetitively seek the cocaine in the future like they were in the native group. So all that to say, it's very fascinating. Um, they also did some kind of reverse studies. So they took mice who were bred to not have a GLP-1 receptor. So
Mm.
these are mice who are naturally deficient in the GLP-1 effect, and they had exaggerated responses to cocaine. So they were like hyper had a hyper high to the cocaine, and they really, really like went crazy seeking continual hits of cocaine. So all that to say, there does seem to be some brain response to GLP-1s. They also then did these studies in opioids, and specifically looking at liraglutide, also called Saxenda. I struggle saying that word for some reason. I don't know why, because we all call it Saxenda. But Saxenda is still on the market. It's pretty commonly used in diabetics. And in fact, and they saw the same effects. And Penn State right now currently has a phase 2 trial looking at use of Saxenda for opioid use disorders. So that's very promising and really excited to see that data.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting, I think, to get these positive reports back because we know anecdotally from our patients that are on this as well that cravings for certain things decrease and our reward system, right, in our own brain has changed somewhat. And we see that a
Totally.
lot in what we call food noise. Um,
Totally.
and I think we've said the term food noise before, but just in case we haven't or people don't understand, food noise is more termed about the constant thoughts and cravings, whether that's a mental or physical cravings for certain things that give our body and brain rewards. And a lot of them are food, right? Drugs such
Totally.
as cocaine, like you talked about. For some,
We
it's
know sugar is
right.
absolutely, sugar is a really high, has a very strong uh dopamine hit, postsynaptic
Yes.
dopamine hit.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's alcohol, sometimes it's right. So there's so many things that our body and our brain will crave for that hit, right, of dopamine. And that once we get it, the brain goes ding, 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 and we like it.
Yeah.
And then we go back to square one of like thinking about it, like when's our next
Yeah.
fix and when's our next
Yeah.
hit. I think the difference between maybe having food noise as opposed to cocaine noise, if you want to call it the same, is that it's socially acceptable to eat food with others,
Yeah.
right? And we don't have a society or a culture where maybe using cocaine on the side of the street is like okay, right? And so with someone that might have more food noise or addiction to certain foods, it's going to be much more socially acceptable to have that constant hit all of the
Absolutely.
time, right? Which makes it even easier and harder, kind of depending on which way you're looking at it. But
Yeah.
we have noticed that if you can kind of calm down that food noise, and so now not
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're constantly thinking about what am I eating? What did I just eat? When can I eat again? What do I want to eat again? What am I craving for? Do I want Thai versus pizza? Do I want, right? All
Mhm.
of those thoughts
Yeah.
have now quieted down. It really releases your brain more access to be more creative or concentrate on work or be
Right.
present with your family or something
Right.
like that.
Or even just the minor things of being intentional with your food. Like, say you have a goal and a plan, like I'm going to eat my meal prepped meals that I have already previously
Yes.
prepared, versus when you at least for me, because I know we talk a lot about our patients, and I'll be honest, like this is also personal for me. Like when I am on my Zepbound, if I have like meal prepped ahead of time and I have, and I have meal prepped so many times in the past.
Mhm.
And then like the afternoon comes around and like all I'm doing is like thinking about food and like what would sounds delicious for dinner and what could I have? And oh, I do have that in the fridge, but that I meal prepped, but I don't really want it. I want something else and like it's not exciting and blah 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 blah. And it makes it really hard to stick with those choices that you have made. But when you don't have that same like like all this like thought and emotions around food and like oh what's going to make you feel good and what's going to um you know all of that all of that
Right.
chatter that we have and audience members who know what I'm talking about will get it.
Mhm.
When you don't have that, it makes it so easy to be like, oh, well, I guess it's time to eat. I guess I should eat. I'm hungry. The meal prep that I have sounds great. No big deal. And it makes it so much easier to stick with your plan.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it makes you, I think, feel more normal, right? Whatever that
Yeah.
is, because a lot of
Yeah.
times you'll meet these people and they're like, oh, I mean, I guess I just eat to survive. And those
Totally.
of us that don't, right?
We're like, what?
For some other reason, we're like, what do you mean
Huh?
survive? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, technically it gives us calories, but like food to me means so much more, right? And so now when you turn off that chatter and your brain is able to calm down, you do, right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
totally acceptable with eating. Oh yeah, I guess it's time for, lunch. Like let's
Yeah.
have lunch and I'm gonna make
Yeah.
sure
I
I
have
get
a
my
healthy
protein.
meal prepared and that's what I'm
Yep.
gonna eat. You're
Yeah.
not craving the carbs and the fat and the sugar and the salt and everything. You're
Right.
like, oh, that's it sounds like filling and that's what I'll eat. So no
Yes.
big deal.
Yes. And so I think that's what's really exciting, I think, about this group of medicines because we have used other things in the past to help,
Yeah.
right, with the certain conditions that we're using these medications for, but nothing has worked to this extent because we
Mhm.
see that it works in multiple areas of the body. And I
Yeah.
think the more we continue to learn about it, the more um, we're going to learn, right? Because
Yeah.
recently,
Yeah.
right, it was the kidneys, and
Yeah.
now we have a little bit of research about the brain. I think the research on the brain part is going to be probably the next really exciting part about
Yeah.
helping people with different addictions, possibly,
Yeah.
and not just
'Cause I
straight
mean,
up
listen,
GLP-1, but
like even that study about the mice, like the fact that like there were mice that were intentionally bred to not have a GLP-1 receptor and they were so much more susceptible to like cocaine addiction, you know? I mean, so like what if those of us who struggle with this, what if we have less GLP-1 natively
yeah.
than, counterparts and it's like that's why I'm more susceptible to carb cravings and I just think it's fascinating and I think that this is the next wave of where we're going.
Absolutely. But no, I think it's nice to see obviously studies behind what we have seen,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
Because we
and
have a
what we
lot of
feel.
people. Yes. But even those other addictions that like shopping addiction. I have a patient
Mhm.
that's like, I was X amount of money in credit card debt because
Mhm.
I was constantly reaching for that dopamine hit every time I
Yeah,
bought something or purchased it.
yeah,
And now she is not needing that. And now she can actually catch up on her credit card debt because she's
awesome.
like, I'm feeling amazing. And I'm like, that's weird. Like I've never heard that correlation, but like it makes
Yeah,
sense, right? And
yeah.
so that's what I mean. Like we're gonna see a lot more. I'm hoping a lot more affirming research studies coming out, but it'll be interesting to see. So we'll keep a
Yeah.
lookout. Anything that you're looking forward to seeing in the future, Dr. Sarah?
I'm really looking forward to this Penn State study. The data should be out anytime. They quit or they finished collecting data in October. So hopefully the paper's on its way. I'm really excited about that. So
Yeah. So we know it
everyone
takes.
be looking for that. It's out of Penn State. So
Yeah, it takes a bit to kind of get I think get all the ducks in the row and get
statistics.
it
Yep.
approved and get it peer researched or peer approved and read.
Yeah.
But so what we think is a faster timeline not met might not be fast for the public. So
Right.
just know that it's going to be
Right.
much longer than what
Yeah.
we wish, but it
Yeah.
is coming, so that is exciting.
Yeah.
And then we'll count on Dr. Sarah to be right on it. So as soon as it's released, we'll come back here and talk to you about it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Other than that, we'll see you guys later, okay?